because there's all sorts of components to a long-term asset allocation strategy that cannot be ignored. Things like liquidity, your payout ratio, especially if you're a foundation, philanthropic goals, how much risk you're willing to take, how do you respond to market volatility? Again, there's a whole host of questions that need to be addressed that then enable us to start to ascertain, well, what's the target rate of return that this client is going to need in order to sustain their lifestyle?
Welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the podcast for the future of wealth management. Thanks for being here. I'm Marla Sofer. Money is a tool. It empowers people. Let's dive into how technology is personalizing advice, strengthening connections, and creating lasting impact. If you're an advisor looking to differentiate, a fintech leader shaping the next wave, or a client ready to take control of your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, and today we are thrilled to welcome Nick Flores to the podcast. Nick is a partner and co-head of OCIO at Capricorn Investment Group. It is a pioneering investment firm that was born out of a family office and has since become a leader in sustainable and impact investing. Originally from Minnesota, Nick earned his MBA at Stanford, built his career by bringing values-aligned investing to families to help them live their lives, to foundations and institutions. At Capricorn, he helps clients navigate the complexity of private market allocations across VC, private equity, infrastructure, real estate, and private credit, all through the lens of impact. Whether it's energy transition, health equity, or tech-enabled solutions for a more sustainable future, Nick and his team focus on connecting capital with purpose in meaningful, measurable ways. Nick, welcome to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a delight to host you here. We always start with this. What excites you about the moment that we're in wealth management?
Well, it'd be silly if I didn't talk about impact investing, especially after that warm intro. But in all seriousness, Global Impact Investor Network, otherwise known as the GIN, they released a report in 2024, which showed that the industry is something like $1.57 trillion in size. And that covers every asset class across several thousand different asset managers, funds, offerings, opportunities. And I guess when you ask me what I'm most excited about, it's really just the continued growth and scale of this industry as a whole. Now, there's no question there's some potential headwinds from the current political administration. But I think if you would ask really anybody who was in this space 10, 15 years ago, when I got my start, we would have been over the moon that there would be such a wide variety of offerings and opportunities in and around this space that afford clients with the ability to values align portfolios and not just, one-off little allocations here and there, which is kind of how it was when I first got my start. So I think just the continued scale of our space and really the future toward which it's moving, I think are all really exciting, especially as, an allocator who is quite passionate about working with families and foundations to values align their portfolios.
I think there's so much in what you shared. And I think that in this moment, I recently heard an analogy. A friend of mine, Doug Fritz, was saying that the next generation, kind of the intergenerational transfer, it's an iceberg. It's moving very slowly, but there's nothing that can stop it. It's kind of like going to happen. And I love that you shared how large the impact investing, the GIN, kind of has measured this market to be. Can you share a little bit about Capricorn, its origin story, and a little bit more about your relationship with impact investing? Like maybe talk a little bit about how you got into it and kind of this latest leap for you.
Sure. I'll start with me and try to be brief since I think Capricorn's story is far more interesting. So you mentioned that I went to the GSV at Stanford. And if you had told me that I would be doing now what I am, I think I would have probably scoffed at that because in fact, I spent a summer doing private wealth management as much as one could at Goldman Sachs. This was 2004, so over 20 years ago, if I can just date myself. And it wasn't for me. And I think the piece that was missing was really this impact component, which I'll come back to in a second. I didn't know that in 2005. Impact investing wasn't even really a thing in the early 2000s. I think the term was coined in like 2008, 2009, which was right around the time, coincidentally, that I made this transition. I talked pretty freely about how it was my then girlfriend and now wife who really encouraged and compelled me to seek a little bit more fulfillment from my career. She was truly an angel on earth working with foster care youth in San Francisco. And that just inspired me. I knew I wasn't going to do that. But I consumed two pieces of media in the late 2000s. I always have talked about how I read A Green Collar Economy by Van Jones. And the main reason I always talked about that book is because I then, after losing my job from a real estate private equity firm in the Great Recession, 2008, I went to go work for his environmental advocacy nonprofit over in Oakland, California. And you might imagine that's a pretty sharp right turn from a career in commercial real estate. But the other piece of media that I consumed was actually Jeff Skoll's An Inconvenient Truth. So the fact that I'm now, working at what was once his single family office, and I'll come back to that in a second as well. What a long, strange trip it's been, and certainly not linear. But now that I'm here at Capricorn, I feel like that's sort of the culmination of what I've been doing in the impact investment space since I transitioned into it in 2009. I just started about 2 months ago at Capricorn. And the main reason I wanted to join this firm, along with a colleague, Mark Berryman, we came over from a competitor, is really because of the values alignment and unwavering support that Capricorn has had for impact investing since 2000. So most people, if they think of or know about Capricorn, probably think of it, like you said, as Jeff Skoll's single family office. Jeff Skoll, by the way, very early at eBay, I think he was the founding president. And that's sort of how he accumulated his wealth. And in the early days, he recognized that if we were going to be successful in addressing some of the Earth's challenges, that solutions were available, but that they needed commercial capital in order to scale and grow. So he was very much, as you said, a pioneer in allocating and investing capital across the capital stack. So many people may be familiar with the Skoll Foundation. It's one of the pools of capital that Capricorn also manages, but also with Jeff Skoll's investment capital, recognizing that capital could be deployed across multiple different asset classes with this impact intentionality at its core. And so that is very much, for all the reasons I just articulated, very much aligned with what I want to do with sort of the next 20 years of my career, the types of people that I want to surround myself with and work with. And I think most important of all, the types of investors that I want to advise. People who recognize, again, that money does have many purposes, one of which can be to create a better world. And I think Capricorn has proven that that can be done in a very commercial, market-oriented sort of market rate return seeking manner.
What I like about your story so much is where you started it was when you interned at Goldman Sachs back in 2004. You saw this gap, and I'll restate what you did not say in my own words, that wealth management or investing as an industry lacked impact. It lacked the impact that directly resonated with clients who were looking to have that impact, and that your own journey and modeling after, what a beautiful example of like watching your girlfriend, now wife, who was having this really deep impact in her community and who was driving real change. What you do at Capricorn and what you've done for so many years is you work with clients who are mission driven. These are clients who care about their impact, and families, foundations that seek a level of alignment between their values, their portfolios, and their impact. What are some of the important questions that you ask to help understand what is their desired impact? What is their purpose? And how can what you do as an impact investor practitioner really enable that expression of their identity through their capital?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that there's no playbook or questionnaire. There are a growing number of tools, which we may talk about. But as much as I've tried to streamline that upfront conversation, the one thing I've learned is that there's no substitute for just a steady line of inquiry. Coming to foundations or families with answers is just never going to be the right approach, at least not for me. And this will sound funny to some, certainly flies in the face of an MBA type like me, but I lead with emotion. So you might think, a wealth advisor or outsourced chief investment officer, would start first and foremost with numbers and financials and what's the return that we're seeking. I mean, we get there for sure, but I think it helps people let their guard down when I ask questions, really simple ones, like what motivates you? What do we want to accomplish? What inspires you? What excites you? What scares you? What makes you mad? What pisses you off? Because, if we could wave a magic wand, it'd be great for me to know what those wealth holders would want to accomplish. Because for some, it may just be that they want to do no harm. I'm not going to cast aspersions on any particular industry, but I had one client who, after the Parkland high school shooting, wanted to make sure she had no exposure to guns in her portfolio. And the good news is we had screened that out as a result of some of that upfront work that we did. And so for some people, just stripping out or excluding entire industries or companies is enough. But for most others, and I think this is because of the growth of the impact investment industry as a whole, for most others, they recognize that more can be done and that capital can be allocated in a purposeful manner to try to drive quantifiable, durable social and environmental benefits. And I think because of the growth of the industry that I referenced at the beginning and the expansion of opportunities that are available in the marketplace, now what you're seeing is more and more clients go deeper and deeper on some of the areas, causes, and issues that they care about, which I would argue brings even more importance to that line of inquiry up front, right? Because if someone says they want to support environmental sustainability, that's great, but what does that mean exactly? Because there are, as we may talk about, there's a number of different subverticals within climate change, mitigation, resilience, where one can allocate capital in a market rate return seeking manner.
Sorry. So you've worked in wealth management for a long time, and you said it yourself that a lot of advisors are their comfort zone is talking about numbers, performance, comparing to an index that might be arbitrary. And you are taking an approach working with high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals, starting with emotion. And I wonder, how have you kind of seen that shift in your own career trajectory, where you see that? I just really like what you said, that you're asking questions about what motivates you, what excites you, what pisses you off, and it helps people put their guard down. Because at the end of the day, we're human. Everyone is human. And what you're doing, it sounds like, is you're creating a connection. And in order to, I guess, activate that connection in the work that you do, you need to make sure that you're resonating with that client, that you're understanding what they're trying to tell you.
Most of the families and foundations that have hired me or my firm to advise them in the past probably did so largely for one reason, and it's because of this impact intention that I have at my core, and presumably that compelled them to get to know me as an advisor. And certainly now that I'm at a place like Capricorn, that's going to continue to be a very big driver of the interest in what we do. So again, I don't want to make it sound too touchy-feely, but I just think that presumably we've done some of the work on the prospecting side to demonstrate that we're legitimate investors, and I think our track record proves that. But if I'm going to get to know someone, and this was a lesson I learned the hard way in the early part of my career, if I'm going to get to know someone, the last thing I want to do is try to impress them with my financial acumen. I'm not going to get there by talking about capital market assumptions or index returns or the latest venture capital or private credit strategy. It's just, I made that mistake in the early days trying to sound overly authoritative, largely because of an insecurity I had around wealth. I didn't grow up with it. So to suddenly find yourself advising ultra high net worth individuals on how they can allocate, their portfolios was new to me. But again, I go back to the emotional component, which is always going to be there. It's certainly been there through the early part of 2025. So if you don't establish that emotional connection early on and then try to use it to help identify, one thing, a very important question I left out is, how will we know if we're being successful? Because okay, we can beat a target rate of return, but if I go back to the client that I referenced before, and we were doing that because we had any exposure to the gun industry, she's not going to be happy with her financial returns, right?
Right.
So again, I don't think it's a panacea, this emotional conversation, but I do think it helps ground client relationships and what matters most to them.
Yeah, beautiful. And I wonder if you're comfortable talking about the reason that you have impact at your core, and is it related to your what you just exposed, that you didn't grow up with wealth? And as you think about impact investing, do you see some carryover? Is it the people that maybe have this desire for impact? Maybe they have these upbringings. Like, first of all, I'd love to understand your journey and, what you saw at home when you were growing up and how it might have created that desire, not only for your own impact, but to empower other people's impact.
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it. So I grew up in what would have then been called a broken household. I was raised by a single mother who was amazing. We grew up in affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable housing. My mom would be very proud of the fact, that she never took government assistance. So sometimes when she hears me talk, she's like, make sure you underscore the fact that, and I'm like, okay, it's okay if you would have. But so the point here is I grew up in affordable housing. I think I was fortunate to go to a pretty good college. So I understood early on the importance of education. And the way that I sometimes tell this story, or what I weave in, is like, we're all affected by climate. I mean, I could point to any number of examples from our livelihoods where, it's been thrust in our face. So what I just listed off, though, are things like affordable housing, education, climate. And these are the sorts of issues that people are increasingly wanting to invest in. And I think that there will certainly be opportunities to make good returns by investing in this manner. I don't lump impact investors into one bucket because there's all sorts of different motivations. Clearly, maybe not clearly, but many of the clients that I've worked with don't necessarily have my shared background. And that's okay. But I think they understand that if they want to invest, say, for racial equity, well, my lived experience growing up as a person of color in the state of Minnesota is going to, and having benefited from naturally occurring affordable housing, is going to inform not only my experience, but also how I view, screen, diligence investment opportunities for them. And that's a part of who I am, and perhaps important to a subset of clients, but I don't pretend that it's meaningful to every client engagement. Other clients may want to work with me because of that degree that you talked about at the beginning. It really varies from one to the next. But I think the point that I try to emphasize is that hopefully my experience better informs my impact investment capabilities. And now that I'm at a firm and on a team where we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, we all want the same things. We may disagree on the best way to get there, but that's the beauty of investing. It's kind of the beauty of humanity. But as long as we all know that we have that intention at our core, the motivations, at least to me, don't necessarily matter as much.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at nomi.com. Yeah, and you shared that beautiful story also about your client who had a different story. Her story was she was really impacted by the Parkland shooting. And so impact investing, it sounds like, follows along with a story, and it's personal. There is a motivation that is kind of rooted in some sort of a personal experience or reaction. I want to come back to something you said at the beginning. And you said, look, there's a lot going on in our political environment. There's kind of a lot of change in the way maybe that from an outsider impact investing is perceived. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. How is impact investing changing? Is that even safe to say in different environments? Can you talk about impact investing? Can you still use that 3-letter acronym ESG that was kind of really hot and now it's really not? Why is impact investing still relevant and important today? And how is it adapting to this political climate?
Loaded questions, especially given the time that you're asking them. So I'll try to hit all of those questions. I'll start first with the dirty acronym,
yes.
ESG. In many ways, I think the proponents or practitioners of ESG investing dug their own grave. I hate to put that so bluntly, but if you go back and look, some of the earliest criticisms of ESG investing in sort of late 2010s, early 2020s, pointed to the fact that the methodologies were flawed. You're applying these ratings and you're trying to label some companies as good versus bad. Well, that sort of relativism doesn't work for an investment discipline that purports to be very methodological. The best example I can give you is an anecdote where There was a foundation that I advised who had hired me to orient 100% of their endowment in alignment with their mission, which was very much focused on climate change. And, we got into this big argument over whether Costco should be included in their public equity portfolio. Just so happens I can't say where this foundation was, but the point is, to me, that impact or alignment, not impact, I'll come back to that in a second. Alignment is very much in the eye of the beholder. And so I feel like in some ways I've been able to, in my career, skirt the ESG controversy because for me, I've never pretended that an ESG aligned, certainly public equity portfolio is going to create real change in the world. I get into some trouble. You talk about, is it safe to say something? Sometimes it can really piss people off in the ESG and SRI, which is sort of the forebearer to the impact investment world. SRI standing for socially responsible investing. So ESG and SRI, I think, oftentimes were applied to listed securities, so public equities or stocks and fixed income or bonds. And I think that the application of ESG methodologies has been so woefully inconsistent across those asset classes. It's why you get some people or some funds where Tesla is good, and other funds Tesla may be bad. And it's sort of like the way that I've, again, sort of skirted that in the past is it really matters to the client. So again, I worked with one individual in San Francisco who about a year ago wanted Tesla completely out of his portfolio. This was, sort of pre-Elon Musk controversy, but it was just because of other reasons, other motivations that I don't necessarily need to go into, even though he was very much oriented toward climate change and he himself drove a Tesla. So again, I think that the industry made a mistake in trying to apply these labels and characterize some as good or bad. And let's be fair, one of the main reasons they did it was because it was an asset grab. The industry was getting hot. And so it was this new way to attract more capital. And some people call it the new active management as opposed to passive index investing. So I'm getting too far into the weeds. What I would say about the current state of impact investing is that there certainly there aren't as many political tailwinds as there were 2-3 years ago. No question. And I think what you've seen is a tremendous outflow of capital from a lot of those ESG funds, if you're going to lump ESG into impact investing as a whole. I think at the same time, climate change is not getting better. Income inequality is worsening. The supply-demand imbalance in affordable housing is getting worse. Financial inclusion is still a problem. There are tremendous portions of the population, both here in the United States and around the globe, that are or underbanked. So, the types of global challenges that I think Capricorn was set up to help ameliorate and address are still ever present. And if you go back to what we were just connecting on, which is more and more investors, certainly next gen, but across the board, more and more investors want to be able to values align their portfolios. Well, I don't know. Is impact investing going away? I don't think so. The one thing I would point to is we've been here before. This is not the first political administration that has perhaps looked down upon some of the goals and solutions that we're orienting toward. But what I would also point to is that impact investing experienced pretty significant growth from 2016 to 2020. So did renewable energy installations. So I don't think one administration can thwart or stymie the continued growth of this space. I really believe it's the future of allocating capital. And you might argue that I've sort of banked my career on it.
Yeah, there's so much in what you said. And I do believe that a lot of your answer is very ethos aligned with why I also became a startup founder and launched Nomi. It is this knowledge that, exactly to quote you, that alignment is in the eye of the beholder and that values are personal. And when you kind of define a rating or a score or whatever it is on someone's values and you get it wrong, and by the way, you mark it up 4 times and you don't necessarily align the outcomes to what the intent was in the first place, then you fail. So you've worked at Caprock, you've been in impact investing for a really long time. You've seen how RIAs operate. You've seen how clients might have a curiosity around this and how they've started to talk to advisors and say, said, hey, I was also moved to have a conversation after what I saw at Parkland or what I saw in the last winter and how the entire planet seems to be reacting so much more aggressively to climate change. What do you think most advisors misunderstand about integrating impact into their conversations with clients? Where do you think advisors are getting this whole thing wrong?
First and foremost would be this mistaken assumption that impact investing or values alignment is a completely different discipline and that it requires a completely different language or communication style with clients. I would say the second, a very close second, is that very few advisors, particularly sadly at the retail level, have a toolkit that empowers them to do everything that I just suggested ought to be done, which is to help clients values align their portfolios. If you're an unresourced or understaffed financial advisor, and I won't throw any names under the bus, but just all you have is maybe this SRI or ESG public equity strategy or fund over here. Well, good luck getting a client to invest in that, given the fact that ESG is a dirty word, given that it's been vilified by a particular, network. And also, if you don't give that client the ability to customize that strategy. So I go back to, you've somehow, not you, the industry has come up with this term sin stocks, and it sort of buckets all these different things from fossil fuels, even though many of us still rely upon them, to other things like guns and, predatory lending and that sort of thing. And it's sort of like, well, in most of my conversations with clients, and this may get to something we talk about in a second, it's just the ability to customize within a public equity portfolio. Most people don't necessarily have the same view on what constitutes a sin stock. So if you're going to hamstring an advisor and not give them the full panoply of opportunities that are available in the private markets, and then you're going to, tell them, well, you only have one or two strategies that are values aligned, but you don't get to pick which values orient that portfolio. Of course, people aren't going to allocate and invest in this manner. So I think those are the two biggest mistakes advisors make. And I don't fault those who are unwilling to engage in the conversation if they don't have an adequate toolbox to serve those clients. Where I think the fault lies is really at the big box sort of brokerage house level, who I think has had fits and starts with their engagement with this discipline.
So you referenced tools a couple of times. And one of the things that I'm curious to tap into is the broader menu that you kind of bring to clients. You are giving allocations into private markets, into private debt, into private equity, into private debt. Maybe you're doing kind of some other asset classes that are helping them get that allocation and exposure. Talk a little bit about how you're really incorporating these different asset classes and different ways that you're constructing an allocation and expression through investing for the clients and families in a way that gives them what they're looking for and you're able to offer measurable impact on the other end of it.
I would go back to our opening conversation about the upfront conversation, around emotions and what's driving people, because that dialogue is going to be every bit as customized as the financial conversation we have around what the portfolio looks like. I'm not necessarily, when it gets around to that numbers conversation, which obviously we need to have, I'm not necessarily going to start with, well, what is your target rate of return? Because there's all sorts of components to a long-term asset allocation strategy that cannot be ignored. Things like liquidity, your payout ratio, especially if you're a foundation, philanthropic goals, how much risk you're willing to take, how do you respond to market volatility? Again, there's a whole host of questions that need to be addressed that then enable us to start to ascertain, well, what's the target rate of return that this client is going to need in order to sustain their lifestyle? Or if it's a foundation, to meet that payout ratio. For foundations, since most have a 5% target, those portfolios tend to look similar. Whereas for families, it's all over the board. And when you talk about the expression of those values within the private markets, that's where I love my job the most, because I think you can, especially nowadays, start with a truly blank slate. Whereas 10 years ago, even 8 years ago, there was just such a limited supply of offerings and opportunities in the marketplace that if someone came to me and said, well, we really want to support poverty alleviation and financial inclusion in emerging markets, it would have been really hard to do that outside of one or two sort of different strategies, especially at the institutional level. And now I think that there's just so many different fund managers and approaches. And I've heretofore, I have been speaking exclusively about market rate return seeking investment managers and opportunities. What I haven't even talked about yet, which is, I think, in some ways, one of the most exciting growth opportunities in impact investing, is this sort of blended finance stack where, and people use all sorts of different buzzwords nowadays. They call it impact first. Sometimes it's risk seeking, risk tolerant, catalytic. It's all these different buzzwords. But the point here is that they are likely going to have slightly lower return expectations in exchange for higher impact expectations, whether that be on the social or environmental side.
Interesting. So it's kind of like flipping it around. Like the narrative used to be like, okay, but if I get that, I'm sacrificing return. And you flipped it around, and there's this kind of new trend, it sounds like, saying, yes, and you're getting higher impact. You're actually getting what you're here to do in the first place.
And so it's so funny because 10, 12 years ago, I feel like I was repeatedly fighting the stigma that impact investing is somehow less than. It's philanthropic, it's not serious, it's not rigorous. And Capricorn's track record over the last 25 years would certainly dispel that notion. But what's funny is you now have wealth holders who acknowledge that. They hold that almost as an axiom that impact investing can generate market rates of return. And now there's some wealth holders and even foundations are saying, that's great, we'll do that. But we want you to help us think through how can we amplify our capital in ways that serve our mission. And that's, I think, where the puck is going. That's, I think, one of the areas that's the most exciting about our space. Now, there's going to be a little bit of a messaging or marketing challenge, right, for all of us who are in this space, because for so long we've been banging the drum. You don't need to accept a financial performance sacrifice. Well, what about those people who raise their hand and say, I want to accept that sacrifice, or I want to accept heightened risk because I think that it can propel greater impact? That's where I think the growing number of people who are coming into this industry with academic backgrounds is going to be fascinating to just see how it continues to develop.
And also recognizing maybe that it's temporary, is that as more people have more agency and control over the way that their capital is allocated, those frictional layers that are putting people all into the same buckets, frankly, and hurting their ability to have impact are fizzling away because more consumers have a higher, more aggressive demand that, no, I want my money to align with me. I want to start to wrap up because we're running out of time. So, Nick, what is one instance in your life or a conversation you've had that has changed your personal relationship with money?
That is a good question. So I mentioned at the beginning I was raised by a single mother. Thankfully, she got married when I was a senior in high school, which sort of paved the way for me to leave the upper Midwest. And my now stepdad, for my 18th birthday, gave me what I consider kind of a nominal monetary gift. And in the card, he said, you can invest this however you want. Any returns that you generate are yours. Any losses are mine. And I did pretty well. I invested in a stock. So that what that showed me, in answer to your question, is how money can earn money, that capital can drive returns. I'm not super proud of the stock that I picked, but it did fine. The worst advice came from the same gentleman who then told me to allocate it to this mining company, and then it went to zero. So the loss was indeed his, but it exposed for me the ups and downs of the capital markets as well as their power.
Yeah, if you play in it, you participate in the power. This has been great. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on the show, for sharing thoughtful, grounded view about impact investing, what's possible when values drive investments. Where can listeners learn more about you and about Capricorn?
Our website is capricornllc.com. One of the things I'm most proud about this firm is that we frequently publish the lessons we're learning, the knowledge we're gaining, and it's all in this dedication and commitment to helping to continue to grow the field and get more capital flowing. So we will continuously publish our thought pieces there. And then LinkedIn is another spot. I'll occasionally share some thoughts.
Listeners, what does aligning your portfolio with purpose look like to you? Let us know in the comments. Message me directly. Don't forget to subscribe to Knowing Me, Knowing You on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Like this episode, share this episode, comment on this episode, and we will see you next time. Nick, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.